an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Gray Sister, chapters 24 through 28. In these chapters, Nona gets gripped up, and it turns out that it's the Noi Gwyn, likely at least, who have her. The Abbess is a little bit out of her depth after all. I didn't even know that could happen. And Zole is coming through. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. First of all, I want to thank Martin for commissioning this episode. I have really been enjoying these books, Martin, so thank you very much for introducing me to them. Y'all, these were some packed chapters, and I kind of had the option to add another chapter because it was like kind of an in-between. I think it was at like 45 pages. But I tend to run out of time when I talk about the, about 50 pages, and adding another chapter would have put me at like 53 pages. And I decided that the discretion was the better part of valor, and to just make sure that I actually have the time to talk about it all this time around. So this first chapter, 24, we are with Nona, and she is heading to White Lake. And apparently her mother went here to worship. And I had forgotten all about, in the opening of the first book, how we are told about there being a different faith, and that like the worship of the ancestor was not something that Nona had been raised with. And I completely forgot all about it. So apparently the like God, I guess, that she worshipped was just called the Hope. And we're going to get into this in a minute because I'm just very curious about it. But Nona apparently did not like come with her to these basically church meetings, sermons. I don't really know what to call it. And eventually, when she got baptized, she would have done. But she got sent away before she was able to be baptized, so she was not a part of this, and she always imagined White Lake as being really, really far away. And Nona figures that if her mother survived the attack on her village, that probably White Lake is where her mother would have headed to. Now the thing is, and I don't feel like This is something that it's unclear to me if it hasn't occurred to Nona, or if it is that Nona is refusing to consider it as a possibility because it's too painful. But if they came at her village because of what Nona did, I would imagine they'd already be aware that her mother would flee to White Lake and would have caught up with her there. And that appears to be the impression that we get once she does like catch up with a priest from the Hope Church. He pretty much says that her mother is dead. He doesn't he uses that kind of mixed language that that is not entirely overt to say it. So there's still a possibility, I guess, that her mother is still alive. But he says like her spirit has rejoined the Hope with this relish to it. And I am assuming that is what that means. And yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure I buy it though. Like I am pretty much, when I read and watch things, I'm pretty much of the school. If I don't see the body, they're alive. And that hasn't always been the case. Like recently, in a couple of things that I've been covering, there has been no body, and yet it turned out that person was not still alive. So, I could be very much wrong about that. But I really don't want her mom to be alive for my own reasons of just feeling like that's kind of a tired trope to like think that your parents are dead and then they're surprised they're not. And I've never really liked that because I have felt that a main character who's like the protagonist and is supposed to be on kind of their hero's journey, not having parents to look to is sort of a huge like part of their development into the hero. And that if you just suddenly make their parents be alive after all, that undermines a lot about like their character from then on out. It's not even that it undoes things, because of course, if they thought their parents weren't alive, that they operated under the assumption and formed the same way they would have if their parents genuinely weren't alive. But what it does to me when they are revealed to actually be alive often is it makes me feel like the author has run out of things to do with this protagonist. And so they've decided to sort of like throw a wrench in a thing just because that would be interesting. And I didn't really totally commit to having them be dead. So I can do this. It's a sort of, trap of you spent so much time trying to decide if you could, you didn't decide if you should. And I don't think this author tends to fall into that trap. This author seems to have plenty of plot to be going on with and doesn't seem in danger of running out of things. So if her mother does indeed turn out to still be alive, I don't really think that's going to be the issue for me. I don't believe with this author that they've just run out of ideas. But I do want to mention that tends to be my reaction, that I get very frustrated about that, just to buy myself a little room in case I do have that reaction. I can't be held responsible. So yeah, she heads over to the church and winds up having to like climb over the walls. It's a weird, the church has like an open roof, which I don't understand. If you have like sermons and it's raining, what do? I don't really get how that works. Maybe they are just meant to stand in the rain and that's part of it. But like, you can't hear, I'm sure, if it's pouring rain and y'all are standing in this right? So Nona climbs the walls, goes inside, and she winds up running into the preacher who had come out of a door carrying this like brass globe that it turns out sort of is meant to be representative of the hope. And what I had said before when I was like, we'll get to that, it sounds like they worship a sun, or like the concept of a new sun, something like that. It's a really like understandable religion for there to be a belief that somehow the ice could be undone. The ice is what rules their lives, right? Like everything about their economy and culture is based on the fact that nearly the entire planet is encased in ice. And therefore, a faith growing out of that reality and fighting back against that reality as a physical manifestation that will literally melt the ice back makes total and complete sense. But it never really entered my mind. I didn't stop to think what the hope was, and it's very interesting to me that it does manifest as something that's so physical. It's literally a star. And it makes me wonder, in terms of like, the way this world works and the fact that it is a planet encased in ice, how do you imagine it would work if the ice did begin to thaw? Like, I would think that any towns would be submerged, right? Because it would cause flooding. I don't really know what the, like, you know, the landscape is here. And being covered in ice, it's not just like everything is so cold as to be uninhabitable. It's called the ice. It's a layer of water. That water came from somewhere. And if it melts, all I can imagine is that the planet just is, you know, there's very little actual land available. But that's neither here nor there. So she runs into this guy. He drops this like bronze ball and she catches it right before it actually hits the floor. And the preacher asks her who she is, but then tries to say a little bit later that of course he recognizes her. And I couldn't tell whether or not that was true or if he was just saying that because he kind of didn't like losing face with her and feeling sort of like off his footing. And so he just said that he knew who she was, because that feels like something a real like kind of annoying shithead dude would do. You know what I mean? Just be like, oh yeah, no, I knew who you were the entire time. Like, it's totally unnecessary. Nobody's impressed. But somebody like this, I could definitely see being very invested in their ego and wanting to make it seem as if the fear and uncertainty they were just displaying a moment ago was feigned. It was all an act, you know? So she tells him that she's looking for her mother when she finally like says who she is. And there's this odd sentence. Don't think I didn't know you, Nona Reed, standing there in your nun's coat with talk of blood rites on your lips. The ancestor worshippers have schooled you well. A sneer now, as if remembering the child. This is such an odd sentence. A sneer now, as if remembering the child reduced the warrior before him. I had to read that sentence several times to get, and I get what he's trying to say is, I think, to be like, his attitude makes Nona sort of shrink away from him after momentarily acting as if she had the situation in hand. But it's so oddly phrased that it's really distracting, and I really would have liked for that to have been said a different way. When we humble ourselves before the hope, we join a greater family than any founded on seed and grunting in the dark. Which, that becomes pretty important as we see a little bit later on. Like, the idea of family and the importance of a blood bond is obviously much more significant to ancestor worshipers. And I find that very interesting. You know, the importance of family on one religion versus another. And, you know, I don't know. I have always been somebody who really believes that family doesn't mean anything. It's an accident. If your family is good to you and you want to support them and be supported by them and it's all healthy, by all means, family can mean whatever to you. But I have seen too many horrifically toxic situations to fall for the fucking line that blood is thicker than water. I mean, that saying is actually, it's sort of like it's just a few bad apples thing, where the whole line is a few bad apples spoil the barrel. So people say a few bad apples as if it's no big deal, when the actual quote is meant to imply it's a huge deal. It's all that matters. Blood is thicker than water, but what is it? Blood is thicker. Blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So basically saying, if you make a promise to somebody as a grown-ass adult because you have a relationship with that person, that means more than just having been born to a certain family. And I 100% subscribe to that notion. Who you were born into is not something that you chose, and how you were treated as a child by those people is not something you had any control over. Therefore, you cannot be held responsible for relationships with these people or be held to any sort of obligation to continue on with a relationship with these people. That's just my view. So yeah, this is when he says she has given up her spirit to the hope. He said it with such poorly disguised satisfaction that Nona had to fight not to follow through with her threat. Had Kiat seized his chance, he might have tipped her into violence. So Nona says she's dead, and his eyes sort of flick over to this door, and he says you should go. And something about the way that he looks at this door seizes her imagination, and she decides that he looked over there because her mother is hidden in there. It's a really odd moment because it's written in such a way that if I were in her shoes, I feel like I would have made the same assumption. So this moment is all immediately followed up with, as she's like storming through, her mother couldn't be dead. There was still too much unsaid between them. They could speak now as adults, not separated by that gulf between a child's ignorance and a grown-up's sorrows. And man, that's a really sad line. That's one of those that's like, that is exactly how it feels to lose somebody and have so much unfinished business with them. And that's usually the way that it goes. You know, I was talking about this on another podcast that I've been doing where somebody's parent is sick and you find out that they are sick by being told about a seizure that they had when they were not at home. And so the main characters don't actually see it happen. And if their mom had died in that moment, they would have missed it. And even so, they kind of missed, like, you know, they wind up getting to see them in the hospital. But if they hadn't, that's frequently how it goes in life. You are not often with people when they pass. It is a beautiful little moment on television and in books to have that, you know, deathbed chat, that final goodbye. Most people do not get that, the vast majority. And it's just a fact. You can't be you don't spend enough time on average with most of the people in your life that the odds work out the moment that they pass away, you will be with them. So this like kind of grasping at the idea that her mother still must be alive because she needs to speak to her is just so deeply relatable. I mean, one of the first things that I thought when I got the call that my father had passed away was that I wish that I had talked to him more. And with Nona, it's a different situation because she didn't have the opportunity to talk to her mother more. She wound up in the situation that she did, and now she's coming home trying to find out some things. So it wasn't her, you know, it wasn't her choice that led to it. But it feels like circumstances shouldn't be that cruel, that once you begin to realize that you need to have a conversation with somebody, the idea of them then being taken away from you just seems really unfair and mean-spirited. So that just really got to me. So she busts through. It turns out that her mother is indeed not back there. And Nona is like, she apologizes, and Mikhail, the priest, like shoves her against the wall, screaming at her for defiling things. And it says, images of Nona's mother filled her mind. The hurt was worse than a wire whip. She needed something, anything, to drive the memories out. Questions might help. What is all that stuff? Pieces of the old world. Kiat broke his silence. So what it was described as: the room beyond was a small one, windowless, with a broad shelf set at waist height running around 3 walls. An image of the Hope returned the lantern light, sparkling in 1,000 pieces of glass, mirror, and crystal. Scores of objects covered the shelf, arranged with reverence rather than scattered. So yeah, Kiat says pieces of the old world. The preacher tells her treasures. And she said, I saw Blackskin, which is an unfortunate name that I wish this author had rethought. But it says, Red Sisters made their armor from blackskin. The oily sheen of the stuff was unmistakable. Even the scrap among Mikkel's treasures would be worth more than the building. And Nona didn't have names for the rest of the things, but some of them had the same gray glinting quality of one of Galabeth's precious whetstones. Arkbone. So he says, they are parts of the ships that carried our tribes here across the Black Sea between the stars, and parts of the works they built here. When the hope comes, he will make them whole again, just as he will bind flesh to bone and raise the dead from their graves to live once more. And he says the Sis built their homes over the best of what remains in the corridor. The emperors themselves built their palace above the Ark and bind the academy to them with its power. We pay explorers to hunt beneath the ice. Your father sold my predecessor much of what we keep here. So that's a lot of information. The Sis have built over what was left in the corridor, and then the Emperor is using the Ark to bind the academy. Now, when he says the academy, I'm not totally sure what he's referring to, and forgive me if this was mentioned before and I'm just forgetting. But Martin, if you want to enlighten me, please feel free. So yeah, that's a really, like, I'm kind of wondering if Nona isn't going to bust up in this place and steal some shit eventually, because this stuff sounds like it's practically priceless. And it is all sitting in an area that would be very easy for her to access. It would immediately send off alarms as to who it was that stole them, because nobody probably, other than this preacher and the people who go searching, knows that these things are here. I am absolutely dying to know how her father was sending or selling this stuff, and yet they were dirt ass poor, because it sounds like this shit was really valuable. And I don't know, what did he do something with that money, or did they just rip him off and not pay him nearly what the stuff is worth, or what? So then comes this wonderful line about Nona just like dealing with her grief. She felt nothing, only an emptiness that reached up from her chest to constrict her throat. She stumbled between the headstones, dazed, trembling with a hurt that had no center to it. I really loved that line. I think that is an excellent way to describe the feeling of grief, where there is nothing to be done. There is simply nothing worse than a problem that you have absolutely no control over. And there is nothing that you have less control over than death. And that feeling of just like sadness and loss and anger and emptiness, but having no center to it, is a good way to say that there's not anything you can focus it on, and there's not one particular thing that you can like cling to. Especially in Nona's situation, where she doesn't know for real what happened to her mother. She doesn't have confirmation. She's taking this guy's word for it. She has no idea the circumstances of her mother's death and how that works. She doesn't know where her mother is buried. There isn't like, there's not a lot there. The most she can do is rage at Scherzel, because Scherzel appears to be behind the attack on the village. So I guess Scherzel can serve as a kind of center eventually, but that's really more a center for action and not so much a center to the emotion. So I don't know. I really like that. So she says that she's going to go to Scherzel's palace, and when she leaves, the emperor will only have one sister living. And just as she is saying that to Kiat, something punches her in the shoulder. And as soon as it says it punched her in the shoulder, I was like, oh, fuck, she just got hit with something, like a bolt of some kind. And sure enough, it turns out that there is a shaft sticking out of her shoulder, and they fucking nail her twice more. They really get her. Even though she's as quick as she is, she wasn't paying attention for this 1 second. And she is caught by the first one, and that slows her down enough that the other two are able to get in under the, past her speed. This just really bummed me out. This is sort of like they're operating on the same sort of principle that Giljon was when he said that he was laying in wait to try and shoot her with his poison, because he expected her to have a reaction to her village being burned down that would make her vulnerable. So these people seem to be operating under that same assumption, except they waited until she got to the next town over and got like verification that her mother was dead. And it makes me wonder whether or not the priest was told what to say to her. They may have coached him to tell her her mother's dead so that she would be in a state of grief and unaware of her surroundings. It might have been all a feint, So, and it says that she is trying to see who is attacking her, and she can't really move because this is affecting her functions, but she calls Kiat into her eyes in order to see, because Kiat, reminder, can see through darkness. Well, he goes into her eyes and she sees this smear of darkness, and she is like, but he can see through darkness. And that is sort of the last thought that she has before she just passes over, or passes out, keels over. So then we go to chapter 25 and Abbess Glass. I fucking love this bitch. I really do. Last chapters, we found out that she had been an inquisitor. It turns out that she had been nearly high inquisitor, or she got high. I can't remember how it went. She outpaced somebody for one step forward, but it was a real it was an enormous part of her life that she was apparently really, really good at. So she sort of knows how they operate and tries to use that to her advantage. But it does not seem later that she is as confident as she has been trying to pretend, R.E., using that to her advantage in the first place. And I think she was just sort of hopeful that nobody was going to think to try and sidestep her yet again. I think that she thought she was just dealing with Pelter. And perhaps if that were the only person she was dealing with, it would have gone her way, because Pelter doesn't seem particularly bright. But it turns out there is something else happening. So first, we have the mistress of the mystic class come in. And she is Sister Spire. And she tells Abbess Glass that novice Zole is missing. And it's really funny because she's so urgent about it. Meanwhile, Abbess Glass has been watching Zole over the past couple days and wondering what the fuck is taking her so long. Because she just assumed Zole is going to fucking leave and go after Nona. And she doesn't do it right away. So the abbess is starting to be like, bitch, what are you doing? So when she finally gets this information that Zole indeed has taken off, she doesn't have the reaction that Spire is expecting, which is, this is the chosen one we're talking about who has disappeared. Aren't you feeling a little bit of urgency about this? Spoiler alert. No, she is not, because she believes not necessarily that Zole is safe, but at the very least, Zole can take care of herself, probably better than a lot of other kids out there who are also out there on their own. And I think that she knows Nona needs help and knows that Zole is going to Nona. So I really like this moment where Spire says, Zole was making such fine progress with all the mistresses, even Sister Wheel, and she seemed very happy to have your permission for the ice trial. Well, happy for Zole. She even smiled when I told her. That I would have liked to have seen. Glass picked up the papers before her, then looked up. Is there anything else, sister? Spire looked surprised. Well, aren't we going to do something? We could send someone after her. Betna, Sister Needle, has just taken the gray. She could... Spire hugged her arms across her chest. I just hate to think of her out there all alone. I know they say she's the chosen one, but she's still just a girl. So Sister Tallow comes to warn Abbess Glass a little bit later, several hours later, that Pelter is coming to arrest her. And Abbess Glass tells Tallow, you have got to let them arrest me. Anything that I do to defend myself, escape, mobilize anyone against them is going to be taken as a confirmation of their suspicions and confirmation of my guilt. So you have got to step back, let them do what they are going to do. Let me do what I am going to do. And we are going to figure out a way out of this on the other side. But I can't avoid being taken in, because that has to happen in order for it to seem as if I have nothing to hide. And that makes total sense to me. It's totally infuriating, but it does make sense. So then we get a little description here of just how things went for her. She knew how the Inquisition worked. Once it had been hers. Old Devis, the man who had recruited her as a watcher, had been 10 years a watcher himself, then 15 as an inquisitor. After Shelley Yamal came to work for him, Devis's star rose swiftly. He rode her shoulders to the deputy's chair before she jumped him to become High Inquisitor with Devis as her second. Had Abel not died, she would still be there, watching the world from the highest room in the Tower of Inquiry. But the loss of a child tears something from any parent. Often what is ripped from a mother's chest leaves her broken, a husk waiting to be gathered to the ancestor. Always it will change her. But sometimes the person who sets aside their mourning blacks is a better one. So that's a really weird paragraph, because the way it jumps, you have to be paying attention. It says, had Abel not died, she would still be there. So I'm guessing that she had been High Inquisitor and got pregnant and then lost the child and sort of lost her ability to keep doing the job is the impression that I get. But it's all said with the way that Abel is just dropped into the conversation. I feel like I'm supposed to know who that is, and I don't. So I just want to clarify that. So Glass has to try and remain calm, and it's not that she's not scared. Genuinely, when Pelter knocks on the door, she has to kind of get control of herself, because she knows what the fuck they do over there, And he tells her that he's placing her under arrest for heresy. She tries to be so you're not going to get any more specific than that. And he's like, I told you what you need to know. And Tallow steps out and is like, okay, but I would like to know more. And this is one of those things. And I'm going to get on a tiny soapbox here, guys. I'm not going to go too far with it. But moments like this, where they're like, we're arresting you, we're going to give you the vaguest of reasons why, and you don't get to ask any questions about it. They sound very over-the-top villainous and are often used in fantasy as oh, look at how bad this guy is. But that is literally how our police function all the time. They will arrest people and not tell them what they're charged with. They will arrest somebody, not say what they're charged with. And when the person understandably fights back, then they will be charged with resisting arrest, which I really need everybody to realize what a fucking trap resisting arrest as an arrestable offense is. That was written into law for a very specific reason, to give cops an excuse to arrest people who are innocent. That's all it is. So this moment of him just being like, I said heresy and that's all you get to know, you're coming with me, that is not over the top. That is literally how it works for a lot of people. And it's really fucked up. I hate it. So yeah, he says, a novice under sentence of death ran from the convent within minutes of that decision being reached. That's hardly heresy, Tallow spat. Holding any law above that of the ancestor is heretical. And then, ooh, excuse me, guys. And the novice had been encouraged to write in praise of past heretics whose histories have no place in any convent library. More importantly, Abbess Glass placed her authority over that of the parent. Zole Lancis was to be sent to the ice against her parents' express instruction, expressed, I may say, through a judge of Verity's highest court. When he says against the authority of her parent, he's talking about Scherzel, right? Specifically, I think. And he finishes, now the child has gone missing, an absence I suspect you two have arranged in order to keep your heretical control over someone you consider politically important at this time of heightened tension. The bonds of family form the branches of the ancestors' tree. No cleric can take to themselves the authority to overrule a parent. Such practice is an abomination before the ancestor, a crime worthy of the Sith roll. So, that's a lot, and it's all conjecture, but that's how this shit works, you know? And the abbess lets them arrest her. It's a symbolic sort of silver chain rather than actual manacles or like the yoke that she once wore. And Glass tells Tallow over her shoulder as she leaves to let the sisters know. And of course, the Marshall sisters and Sisters of Discretion will need to take action if I am questioned in the Tower of Inquiry. And this is her basically being like, oh yeah, and if they do this thing that they're not supposed to do, come at me. She just drops this bomb that she knows that this procedure isn't how shit is supposed to go. And, oops, sorry, I hit my mic. Pelter says, oh, she's full of shit. It's, you know, she has this wrong, don't listen to her. Clerics of the rank of abbess, abbot, or above are entitled to refuse questioning in Inquisition outposts, and indeed in most other locations. But the Tower of Inquiry is sanctified and sanctioned to put any cleric to question, even the high priest himself. And Abbess Glass is like, not so fast. I used to be a High Inquisitor. And they have a rule that I can't be put to the question on Inquisition property because I was a High Inquisitor. And the present High Inquisitor cannot be either. This was done specifically so that people couldn't just turn around and grab the old Inquisitor and settle debts by, you know, torturing them in this very place that they had been. She says, and as an abbess, I am, of course, subject to church law rather than secular law, so the judges' courts are not a fit place either. And Pelter is like, okay then, like he's trying to act like he still has control, and he's like, so where the fuck do I bring you? And she says, take me to the Emperor's palace. And we find out that she is indeed going to a palace, but not to the one that she asked to go to. And Glass says, have the sisters watch from a discreet distance, Tallow dear, which I really liked. Just the idea that, like, she's just letting everybody know that people are watching. And it's not exactly accomplishing anything, but maybe it makes them be on their best behavior a little bit more aggressively than normal, or just is a little bit threatening. I don't know. Let's see. If Pelter took her to the Emperor's palace, it would guarantee Glass's safety, but there was no place within those walls that rumor would not spread from. Rather than have Scherzel hand him both a confession and control of the convent, along with an excuse perhaps to seize any monastery he liked, Crucicle would have the whole business unfold under his own roof before the disapproval of the high priest and the archons, before the Cis and the academy. To Glass's knowledge, Crucicle wasn't even aware what was happening. It was one thing to grumble about not having the red and the gray answer your every whim. Quite a different thing to wield the Inquisition as a political knife to carve out what you wanted. So that, we find out later, does not turn out to be how it goes, but we'll get back to that. I only have 20 minutes left. I really need to hurry. Okay. So Nona has been knocked out, and she wakes up and is really disoriented. We wind up finding out that she's basically locked in a box, but she is so out of it that she can't even quite get a grip on that being the case. And she is sort of like in her head and kind of fucked up from this drug and, you know, just the sheer disorientation of the moment. And she sort of, her mind drops into this other place and she suddenly realizes that she's inside Kettle's head because of them being thread bound, which I'd forgotten that happened a little while ago. And this winds up being crucial to everything working out. So Nona is realizing that she's like looking at memories about her from Kettle's perspective, which is so wild. And I really like how a little bit later, Nona decides that she needs to kind of pull back from exploring too much because it's a violation of privacy and, you know, just not okay, really. But for the moment, she's not even aware enough to kind of make that judgment call. So she's in there and we cut to Kettle, who is with Apple. Now, I am a little bit confused here. And Martin, if you're listening, let me know if I'm on the right track. Apple had just been in a scene with Abbess Glass talking about how Kettle ran off and she's going after Nona and what should I do? And Abbess Glass basically told her to like let Kettle go. Is this meant to be a bit of a time jump backward where we're seeing the moment that I don't think so, because they're in a cave. So did Apple just kind of ignore what the Abbess said and go help Kettle anyway, or what? Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I guess that, like, because she's asking her if she wants more wine. I guess that she, like, tracked her down and they're still in communication. But I just kind of was like, how? I would have thought that Kettle would be further along by now, that Apple wouldn't have the time to just go out and bring her stuff and then get back to the Abbey without her absence being noted, you know? I don't know. I'm just sort of like confused about that. And it doesn't wind up mattering too much because the Kettle sets out to find Nona right after getting these sorts of images in her head that Nona's in trouble. But I just was sort of taken aback by that moment. So she's, let's see, a boat. Kettle was on a boat watching the bank pass by. Bushes, stunted trees, fields beyond, low hills rising. Nona? Kettle's voice. But Nona could hear the thought, too, directed at her where she lurked in the darkness behind Kettle's eyes. Nona tried to answer, but found herself mute, perhaps not as free of the poisons as she thought. So Kettle, for her part, we find out that she was trying to forge a shadow bond between her and Nona when Nona sort of like connected with her and did the thread bond. And Kettle has shadow bonds with several other people. Apple, Betna, who she must learn to call Sister Needle, and with Sister Frost. Kettle's bond with Saphira had been cut years ago, the severing more painful than the knife that Saphira had stuck her with. But no shadow bond is ever truly broken. Since Apple had pushed her into the dark, Kettle had started to hear whispers along that old bond with her former bedmate, hints of emotion, tugs of wanting. Which, I don't care for that. That, like, even if you break it, which is super duper fucking painful, that you can, it's still gonna fucking be there. That sucks. I hate it. So she is sort of sensing where Nona is, like, in general, from, I think, the connection with Nona's memories, and is heading in that general direction on a ferry. And they eventually, she has them pull over and she gets off, realizing that she was like, she's a little beyond where she meant to get off. And as she is walking, this guy sort of steps into her view and tries to be like, hey, so where are you going? Can I help give you directions? It is the most suspicious shit, and the fact that they expected this to work on her. I mean, I guess she almost gets got in the end, so But that wasn't because that worked on her. I think just jumping her would still have worked just the same. This guy, you know, she's not actually fooled. Oh, and this, I really liked this line. I jumped ahead a little bit here. Because Kettle goes to an inn and she like puts bolsters in her bed, but then sleeps on the floor in the corner, which is just so paranoid. And I love it so much. I'm not sure I understand. Oh my God. Siri is just so up my butt. Sorry. So it says, Kettle's dream rose, red, curling around her, and Nona fell, loosening her grip, dropping away into the chaos of her own mind. And I just love that description of her dreams rising red and curling around her. It sounds like weird smoke that's like alive, you know? I don't know. I really liked that. So Nona wakes up. She thinks at first that she's in on the sea, and because of all of the like rocking and everything, and Kiat has to be like, dude, you're being carried. You're just rocking around because they're carrying you, but you're in a small box and you've been in this box for 2 days. And once she starts to sort of like get a little bit more back to herself, she can smell that she probably shit and vomited in this box, which appears to be the case later when they strip her and just douse her in water. And she says to Kia, I'll kill them, every last one. That's the first reasonable thing you've said, perhaps ever. And honestly, I am very eager to see Nona fucking wreak hell on these people, whoever they are. So she gets gripped up again once she gets taken out of this box, and they're putting collar and cuffs around her wrists and ankles and neck. It turns out, and this is exactly what I sort of suspected was happening, when I realized that they weren't exactly connected to one another. These are spelled cuffs in order to keep her abilities at bay, so she isn't able to like release her flaw knives, and she's just not able to do the things that she normally can. And we find out that these cuffs are incredibly valuable. Like, the kind of magic that it takes to imbue them is something you work for at least 50 years to even gain the knowledge of, and then to actually do it to an object takes the better part of a couple months sometimes. So she's sort of like thinking about escaping and telling herself that if she does and she manages to take these cuffs with her, that she'll have all the money she fucking needs, because these things are absolutely priceless. And between this and the little cache of items that's living in the Hope Church, I kind of feel like Nona might have herself set up if she tried to get, like, if things worked out, she could have a good amount of money. So she gets doused with water and given like basic clothing to wear and thrown into a cell. And the people, she's looking at them trying to figure out who they are. We find out about the Noigwin a little bit later, but it is at the moment impossible for her to tell who they are. They're all like, they have almost their whole head shaved. She can't even tell what gender they are. And the whole vibe of this is just very different from any group that we have seen so far. So I had no idea who these people were. And it turns out, like, I'm calling them Noigwin, but that seems to be not quite correct. They are what are called the Lightless, which means they were in training to become Noigwin, and for whatever reason they didn't quite make it, but they are still extremely skilled. They're just not at Noigwin level. Which, that's an interesting idea, you know, having gotten so proficient at a thing, but still not quite as good as the very best. What do you do with people like that? So And Nona notices how nobody seems very wary of her, and she's like kind of wondering about that. But later on, when she finds out what the cuffs are, she's like, oh, okay. So this thing with Kettle and this dude who tries to get in her face, this leads to such a good fight scene. I really have grown to appreciate so much more in the past year of doing Spoil Me. What a particular skill it is to write a fight scene well. Action scenes in general, but fight scenes very specifically. They can be so boring to read if they are not done well. And there are authors who will find every reason to avoid writing them. I'm looking at you, Stephanie Meyer. And just not have the action even be visible so that they don't have to go through this, because it's a long, slow process. But the way this is written is so good. Kettle, like, he stops her. She can tell something's going on and immediately sort of dives to the side, and they come at her, and there's more of them than she had expected. And she winds up taking out all but one. And Nona is in Kettle's head watching the entire fight and thinks that Kettle's going to maybe get out of this. But she watches as somebody kind of gets the drop on Kettle, and their sword is at her throat. And Nona thinks to herself that she's going to stay with Kettle in her mind in order to share the pain of this death with Kettle, because she, as she puts it, it was the least she could do. And that is really something. Kind isn't quite the word. I don't know what to call it, but that's ride or die shit. And then, as Nona's watching this guy's face who's attacking Kettle through Kettle's eyes, it says, the man's face began to distort, bulging outwards, and Nona could make no sense of it. When blood suffused his skin and began to erupt from eyes, nose, and mouth, both Nona and Kettle stared in vacant disbelief. Suddenly, as if their terror had released its hold on time's flow, the face exploded and a red fist emerged from the tumbling gore. And when this happened, I was like, oh my God, it's Zole. Oh my God, it's Zole. And sure enough, it is. And it turns out Zole can do all kinds of shit. Like, this bitch, thread work is like not even the word for it. She is just pulling people around like puppets a little bit. And she emphasizes it works only on some people if they already kind of want to do the thing. It works on other people if they trust her. So it's not something that's like infallible or that can always be pressed into working at a moment's notice. It depends on some factors, but it's still really fucking impressive. So yeah, and guys, I gotta tell you too, there is a moment here that genuinely made me cry. Zole says that she's following Kettle. Kettle asks why. Zole says, because you're following Nona. Why do you want to find Nona? We plan to visit the ice together. Zole almost shrugged, turned away as if embarrassed. She is the shield. I am not supposed to lose her. I didn't think you believed in all that Chosen One stuff. Kettle crossed to the first two attackers and stooped to recover her throwing stars with the aid of a knife. I do not. Why, then? Somewhere behind Kettle, Zole spoke in a voice almost too quiet to hear. She is my friend. And honestly, guys, it wouldn't have affected me so much if I didn't know that Nona was watching. And that slayed me. Like, that is, Nona just needs somebody to have her back at all times. And with Kettle, it's more than about Nona. With Kettle, it's a matter of honor. It's a matter of politics. It's a matter of justice. Zole, it feels like she has like hitched her wagon to Nona's in the way that Nona does to other people. And I needed that so bad for her. I just like legit, I'm even just tearing up now thinking about it. I know people like Nona who love really hard and really loyally with everything they have. And when you watch them not have that reciprocated, it's fucking heartbreaking, man. People don't know what they're throwing away. And so to finally see somebody who is there for Nona the way that she needs so bad, it killed me. It killed me. Absolutely, like, just dagger to the heart. It was so good. I loved it. I loved it so much. So, yeah, the next chapter, first of all, we find out that Zole's never killed anybody, and this guy that she's fucking punched his head off is the first one. And Kettle says that she's right to feel that she has taken a life, that it's not something to be taken lightly. And Nona, meanwhile, is over there in her cell feeling a little bit like called out and trying to even remember who the first person she killed was. And she doesn't even, like, she figures that she was about 8 years old. And it's just, she doesn't have the same relationship with this as other people do. So they question this guy who is one of the lightless, because Zole takes absolutely all of, like, well, Zole takes out the last one, Kettle takes out all the others, but the first guy who went down, she hit with a throwing star that had poison on it that made him unable to move, and I think unconscious. And so they have him to question. She feeds him a pill that has like that truth stuff in it. And I felt so bad for this guy, honestly. He's answering her questions against his own will, and he literally winds up biting off his own tongue and spitting it out so that he can't keep answering the questions. And that fills his mouth with blood, and he's on his back. So he's basically begins drowning in his own blood before Kettle finally pulls her knife out and puts him out of his misery. But yeah, they get enough information about where the Nui Gwyn headquarters is set up that they think they're going to be able to pursue it. Apparently, the Nui Gwyn move headquarters like every couple years. So even if you find out once where their headquarters are, that may not be true the next time you head over there. And this is when Zole reveals that she can get Kettle and other people to do things or believe things that they wouldn't like ordinarily. And when Kettle like expresses doubt in what Zole can do, Zole looks to her and says, "Go home." And Kettle turns around and walks to the road and begins to head out. And it's not until she's like, it sounds like a good ways away before she begins to sort of realize this isn't what she wanted and turn around and be like, what the fuck? And Zole also manages to make her burst out laughing, which is so wild. I love that Zole, who is so deadpan and has just cracked, like, she cracks one joke, the very first joke that Nona has ever heard her crack in this chapter, and I don't even remember what it was. I think she says something about how, like, Kettle is like, I can't believe you could do that to me, and Zole's like, well, I am the chosen one, and kind of like smirks a little bit. I love that her ability is to make somebody laugh like that, because that's just not, I'm not sure that's all it is. She might be able to make people feel any emotion, but the laughing specifically being what she does here is so out of character. So they're going to head into Nui Gwyn territory, and we will see how that goes. And I only have a minute to talk about what's going on with the rest of Abbess's story, but I don't really need much time. The Abbess is just sort of like playing her cards and keeping herself from going where she doesn't want to go, so she thinks. And she is on her way, she thinks, to the palace, and remembering, she's using like these memory exercises in order to think about some of the weak spots of the people that she is going to be seeing. I'm trying to find the spot that this like is written. because I love the fact that she is like also thinking about how much information comes into Sweet Mercy that people don't know about, because they just believe that, you know, being as isolated as they are, that probably news is slow to travel, but that is not the case. Let's see. Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. For the disposition of the clergy and of the Inquisition, however, she kept a map hung upon the back of her mind and ever glowing. Each report that arrived at her desk brought certain players into sharp resolution, their location at a particular time and place assured, their current whereabouts diffusing along likely routes and toward likely destinations as time blurred fact into speculation. What a wild idea. So the carriage comes to a halt, and who should get on but fucking Lord Toxis, who is here to just basically rub her nose in the fact that they are not going to the king or the emperor's palace, whatever his name is. They are going to Scherzel's palace. So shit ain't gonna go fucking well for her the way that she thought. And he is so livid with her. Oh, also Joelle's father is there, and he's a little bit fucking snotty about the fact that his daughter is injured, even though this bitch deserved it, and the abbess knows it. So, and Glass tries to just keep a poker face through a lot of this conversation with Toxis, but he finally does get to her. Let's see. Did you... oh, right. Imagine if she were captured. Do they think they would invite me to watch her die? And she says, the emperor forbid you. And he says, the emperor will never know. He lurched forward, roaring his words, flecks of spittle peppering Glass's cheeks. Do you think you're going to tell him? Do you think it's Crucicle's palace the Inquisitor here is taking you to? Did you think you'd won again with your forgotten laws and petty little rules? You'll be tried in a palace, you sorry hag. You'll be tried in a palace, found guilty in a palace, and burned in a palace. Just not Crucicle's. Pelter here is taking you to Scherzel. How do you like that? And while you're getting your just desserts, I will be making sure that a certain young novice of your acquaintance is wishing with all her black heart that you'd let her hang or drown, or even that Raymel had taken his pleasure, because she won't die easy, Abbess. She really won't. And the poor Abbess just like bends her head and realizes, fuck, I might have fucked this one up. And I really felt for her in that moment. I really did. So that is the end of the chapter. I'm glad I didn't add that extra chapter on there. I still almost ran out of time. Thank you very much again to Martin for commissioning this episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed the coverage, and I will be seeing you again soon, hopefully, with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.